I'm Mariana Newton, and today is May the 10th, 1993, and we're about to interview David Watt in his new home near Atotonilco, and David will tell us just exactly where he's located and all about it.
I'm David Watt, a country boy of 71, and we are at La Troje de Agua Bendita, which is a part of Agua Bendita, blessed water, that belonged to Pippi Ortiz, el torero. And this house is interesting because it grew out of the ground like a tree. We made all of the adobe. The ceilings are made of carrizo, a bamboo which grows in the arroyo here. These duramientes, railroad ties, came from the railroad which went through just a few feet from here. And the vigas, or the beams in the ceiling, are old telephone poles. We even found some fire brick that said Missouri Pacific on it. So this is really, are we going outside?
Okay.
And this had been an old troje, which is an old granary. And every level's area was covered with stone, so we had to buy very little stone. All of the plants are native plants, which we've gotten from the hills around here. So really it's kind of a rearrangement of everything that was here before. And we've had to buy very few things except a little wood and, of course, the appliances and the plumbing and all of that. But, Vicente, pase por aquí. Aquí es su nombre es Travieso. Y Vicente. Y Vicente built this house completely. He had help, of course, but we had no contractor, we had no architect on the scene, although we did have architectural help. And he had he's worked for me for about 14 years. Previously he had been a campesino, but he just happens to be very intelligent and, you know, just a marvelous human being. And of course he's very proud that he was able to do all of this himself, and he really has done just a fantastic job.
Did you introduce your dog?
Yeah, this is Travieso. Travieso means mischief. A lot of horses are named Mischief, but Travieso fits him because he's a very mischievous little dog. Put some these barrel cactus outside the wall, and Vicente told me, don't do that. He said, because we make candy out of them. But the man who brings them, he goes up into the high Sierras and he puts them in a wheelbarrow all by himself, and then he wheels them down to a place where we can get a truck in. But all of these cactus come from around here somewhere. And there's a great variety. In fact, there's a cactus club in San Luis Potosí, and the club comes over here because there are some quite rare types. A few of these we bought at Carareta, which is a cactus propagating farm run by fourth-generation German Mexicans. And they have some of the more rare forms. But almost all of the cactus now are protected by federal law, and you can get in a lot of trouble by digging up the wrong. Well, it's an old canal, and it was a way of bringing water from the Ojo de Agua, a manantial, which rises right in back, into the fields where it was used to irrigate in the dry season. And Vicente remembers when it was a roaring torrent of water year-round. It's all dried up now as a part of the, the lowering of the water table.
Where's your sign here? Okay.
And we hauled about 40 dump trucks of garbage out of here, and it became the neighborhood dump. And then we decided I wanted to raise tropical plants, so we're making a kind of tropical walk here. And we built a sort of arbor over it that we're going to get some yellow jasmine to grow on. We're starting to collect tropical plants. And it's warmer here because the walls will provide heat. And there are just a few hours of really killing frost a year, but ordinarily it's enough to destroy tropical plants. Wood, because after all, cold air is heavier, but it doesn't seem to. Because last winter, which was not a cold winter, farther along here where it gets deeper, nothing was bothered. But up in front, we did lose a few plants. It's all looking kind of ragged right now because we're really just working on it. Okay. Well, you know, this was an old Spanish water tank. And for hundreds of years, it was holding water for these fields beyond. But the water table has lowered, and there's no water available. So we're building these two little lakes, and there's an arroyo and a little bridge, and there's a little waterfall over there. And it'll be kind of a picnic area. This is the zaguán, which is the entrance of the house. And this rug was made by a man in Oaxaca, but it's from a Navajo design. And we have some real old Navajo rugs, but I like Navajo designs. The house is divided into three sections. One's a public area, utility area, and the other is a private area. And this is the corridor that leads to the bedroom area. Oh, this is a little office. And there are just 2 bedrooms and 2 baths back here. This is the master bedroom. And you can see the beams are made out of old telephone poles, and the roof is carrizo, which looks like bamboo, but is really a kind of grass. And most of this furniture was made here. And it has and there are a few old Victorian stinker pieces.
How about the screen, David?
And then the screen, drawing of a screen, and the carpenter drew it out in full size on butcher paper, and then he cut it out with a jigsaw. I think he did a good job. And this is the guest room. There's only one guest room, although we could put up more people in the estancia, probably. And over the alfalfa fields and into the hills. And fortunately, this area floods, so I doubt that they'll ever be able to build any houses on it. You know, Susan Sontag, the political writer, was here, and she did a piece, I think it was for House and Garden magazine, in which she said that these 3 wells down there, that one of them was called the Pozo de Asesines, you know, the well of the murderers. And the Indians, because of the prevalence of warm springs here, the Indian tribes would come and meet and discuss their problems, and they were often robbed, raped, and murdered for their trouble. But there is a sort of evidences of a kind of grand processional staircase that went down to this arroyo that you can't see, but you know, they used bathing in parts of their ritual. And the people were Chichimeca, or they were largely Otomi, and the people who live here now are Otomi. And they're quite different. They look different, and they act differently. Know the name of this virgin, It's quite an old piece, and it's made out of granite. It's not cantera. And like so many virgins, they say that she was found in a cave. But Vicente made this little base, and he's the one who decided how high she should be. And I think, you know, he has just a natural sense of proportion. He has a marvelous aesthetic response.
Yeah, he's very artistic.
Yeah, he really is.
This is fabric.
This is a Guatemalan fabric. And the reason I liked it is because it looks Navajo. It looks Indian.
Exactly.
There's a book of Otomi designs, and I wish I could have used it, but you know, the Otomi designs are so fragmentary, it would be difficult to... but I consider this an Otomi house. It was built totally by Otomis who don't even go to San Miguel. And everything came from here. People think of it as being a Santa Fe style adobe house. But of course, they've never seen pictures of Santa Fe, and they were doing this here long before they did in Santa Fe. Oh, this is an arcon, and they called them arcones con campanas, and they had bells on them, so that if the servants opened them up, the bells rang. And Pippi Ortiz gave me this for my birthday the first year we were here. And he got it from the city of Guanajuato for a especially good corrida that he presented there. And it was from the old Valenciana mine, he said. And supporting this, it had a lot of, you know, evidences of ore samples that had been in it. And it also had a lot of his cards when he appeared with Dominguín in Spain. I think he was the first Mexican torero to wear the suit of lights with the Virgen de Guadalupe on it. It was made here in San Miguel. This is Reina Rangel, and she lives in the sanctuary of the Atotonilco, and she's developing into a marvelous, marvelous cook. And she's really a wonderful girl. She has 2 children. Rodolfo and Janet. Janet's, ¿verdad? Janet. Janet's 2 and Rodolfo's 6, right? Yeah. Right. Your seats. And I had an idea of having a bar with 4 of them, but I haven't done that. But see, the farmer would come in and he would buy a new tractor, but he'd say, okay, I'll buy the tractor, but I want my old seat. And so the tractors I bought them off of were not really old tractors, but the seats, you know, are fairly old. They're cast iron. This is the Picasso that Picasso painted. I bought it at Valerie. You know, he was trying to revive the ceramic industry in Valerie. And he did editions. It was a white edition, but he would come up there on promotions, and he was up there one day. And he painted this, including the bug. And
it's a happy face.
Yeah, it's a happy face. It's the sort of thing that he would do. This is my twin cousin, Marion. We were born within hours of one another, and we were raised together as twins. And it's a little complicated because I have to call Marion up and say, how old are we this year, Marion? And we're getting younger and younger.
Isn't it the truth?
Yeah. And this is Olivia Cole. And not too long ago...
Who was not born the same day.
Who was not born the same day. She was born in Long Island, weren't you?
No.
Where?
Keep going.
Where were you born?
Keep going. This is your interview.
Oh. Well, we got off the plane at Udaipur, India, which is where the Lake Palace is, you know, that beautiful old palace that kind of floats serenely on the lake. And I walked into the operations office, and there is Olivia sitting there with her beautiful mother. And they had...
Who looks like her twin sister.
Thank you, at least.
And they had been... you had been to the Lake Palace. and they were leaving. You were waiting for our plane. Didn't you get on our plane?
We were waiting for a flight to go to Bombay.
Oh, they went to Bombay. But they also went to Kashmir, you know, which was on the State Department advisory at the time because, you know, they were having a lot of difficulties in Kashmir then.
God protects the innocents and fools.
Yeah, yeah, right. You can't say drunks because I know you don't drink. You know, in the days when he was a reigning bullfighter, he doesn't look too great there, but when he was older, he was a really very handsome man. And when he retired from the bull ring, he made a movie, and he was the male lead, and Lupe Gallardo, who became his wife, was the female lead, and she was an incredibly beautiful lady.
Tell us a little bit about your life before San Miguel and what brought you to San Miguel.
Well, I lived in Chicago, and I was a writer and an editor, and I founded Chicago Magazine and also a magazine called Discovery, which is a travel magazine. I worked primarily in what they call special purpose magazines, you know, which are like airline magazines, insurance magazines, and so forth. And I came to Mexico a number of times on stories, but actually, you don't really see very much when you're, you know, out on a story, because if you travel with a photographer, all photographers get their best pictures at daybreak and at sunset. So usually, when I would arrive in San Miguel, it would be already dark, and then we would frequently leave in the morning, and we stayed with a friend, Esperanza Beltrani Puga, who in San Miguel is known as Puce. When her mother died, she became very religious, and we used to call her Pious, and we thought that was irreligious, and so we changed it to Puce. And she was a friend for about 45 years. And I do recall, she was a maiden lady, and I do recall that she said to me one time, "You men are going to have to stay until daybreak." She says, "You're giving me a very bad reputation in this neighborhood." And then not too long ago, she had a maid whose name was Facunda, and we called her Mother Earth. She was a big Zapotecan Indian. And when we left, about 4 o'clock in the morning, she used to catch birds, and I used to open all of the cages, and I put a few pesos in each cage and let the birds out.
Oh my God.
And she never said a word to me until, a couple months ago I saw her in the street, and she said, "You know, those birds were worth more than 5 pesos."
What is the name of this creature?
Well, her real name is Tuxedo because she looks like she's wearing a tuxedo. But the Mexicans have trouble with that, so we call her Medias Blancas, you know, White Sox, which is the same as President Clinton's cat. I guess his cat's name is just Sox. Huh?
Sox.
She's
Yes,
white.
right.
She's White Sox.
My goodness.
And she's also named after the Chicago White Sox, who were my favorite ball team when I was living in Chicago.
So, David, the very first time you came to San Miguel was about, what, 1947?
About 1947, right.
And then when the first time you came here more seriously, thinking about
Retiring.
possibly retiring, was what, 1970?
1971. My wife had a progressive disease, and I knew that we would have to go someplace where we could get help, and where, you know, she could lead a quieter life. Because we had really been on the fast lane in Chicago. She had worked for Esquire, and then she was the food and entertainment editor of Chicago Magazine for about 7 years. And her last job, she used to run single-handed it's the American Newspaper Publishers Association annual convention, which was held at the Chicago Beach in Chicago. And she was a very dynamic gal, but people in San Miguel, of course, never saw her in that condition because she had already deteriorated quite a lot.
You were retiring that 20 years ago?
Yeah, I was just a little over
young?
50, right.
Yeah.
Well, but I really didn't have too much choice. You know, we had to go somewhere.
Yeah, right.
And I sort of hated to leave it all, but I did. And see, when I had been coming to San Miguel in the 40s, I always thought, you know, if you retire, this would be a good place to go. Well, travel writers and editors always get a lot of invitations. And usually it's a good way to case a place because you're entertained, you know, by local people, and you get to see what the local life is really like. So I accepted every invitation if I thought it was a potential retirement site. And I went all the way around the barn and came back and decided I liked San Miguel better than any other places that I had cased.
I can understand that.
And I've never regretted it.
And then
I like it very
you
much.
started looking for an actual place to
Yes.
to buy, right?
Well, yeah, we thought we should live in the country, and we just drove around the countryside, and we came down this road here, and I saw this old house. You know, it looked like it was done by Attila the Hun,
you said.
and with decor by Count Dracula. And a man was standing out in front, and I said, "Is this house for sale?" And he said, "Yes, it is." And I said, "Well, who does it belong to?" He said, "It belongs to Pippi Ortiz." So I didn't know who Pippi Ortiz was, but I knew that my friend Puce would probably know. And I think Les said, "Well, ask Puce because she's related to everyone." And so I called her up and I said, "Puce, I want you to speak to your cousin." And she said, "Which cousin?" And and I said, "Pippi Ortiz." And she says, "Oh, he says he's my cousin, but, you know, he's probably
She
not."
didn't really believe it. Well, we have this marvelous
Yeah.
picture here of Pippi Ortiz. When I say we have this picture of Pippi Ortiz, tell us about it, David.
Yeah. Well, Pippi at this time was a reigning bullfighter. I think I think this was about 19, you know, in the early 30s. He had been presented in the bull ring by Rodolfo Gallona, who is probably the most famous of all of the Mexican toreros. And it was just about this time that he was invited to come to San Miguel on a benefit to raise money to build a roof for the market. You know, that's the big market. And he had never been in San Miguel before. And he fell in love with the place, and he bought the Rancho Atascadero, where he and Lupe were married in the chapel the next year. It would be about 1934 or 5, I think.
The Atascadero existed then. That was already.
Yeah, it was an old ranch.
Really?
And you can still see part of the old chapel, although they've taken it out in the inside, but you can see it from the outside. Father Mojica came down to be his best man, and Lucia Mojica Briviesca was the matron of honor. But I don't think Pippi said that the Mojicas had never been in San Miguel before. And then Pippi built what's now the Villa Santa Monica, which, you know, was for Father Mojica's mother. And he built a house next door, which was for her housekeeper. Let's see, what else? Oh, and then he was responsible. Pedro Vargas was born where the Conserves de San Miguel is located now, but he was not interested in San Miguel, and he lived in Mexico City. But he brought down Rufino Tamayo. He built that house. Then Rufino Tamayo sold the house to Pedro Vargas. And then
you mean the house on the Salida?
On the Salida. And then the Hotel Ermita was called El Refugio, but it originally belonged to Jose Cosio Pomar. And they used to have an empty swimming pool there, and there were no taxes on imported liquors, and it was just filled with cases of booze. And they would play dominoes, largely, and cards. And Jose Cosio Pomar lost everything, and he said, well, to Mario Moreno Cantinflas, I will bet you my house. So he bet the house and he lost. And they were all drunk, and so they all went home laughing gaily. But Cantinflas sent his lawyer over the next day, and Cosilla Pomar signed over the house.
That's how Cantinflas got
And that's why everyone's so happy that the Ermita has been such a bomb.
That's funny. I never heard that
Well,
story.
Pippi told me that, you know. And I believe it's probably true.
Yeah.
But
But Cantinflas never really lived here or
I don't
spent
believe
much
so.
time here.
No. Let's see, so who did Pippi bring? Well, Pippi entertained everyone across the road, you know, from Gary Cooper, Mario Lanza, Deanna Durbin, and they all gave him publicity stills, and he had a wall of all the people who've been there, which was just about everyone, you know, in Mexico, and a lot of people north of the border. Pippi was a very entertaining man, and he told a lot of stories. I'm not absolutely certain that all of them are true, but the ones that I have some sort of corroboration on are the, you know, the ones that I've been talking about.
David, was it in 1972 that you bought the house that you lived in?
Yeah, I think we bought it in 1971.
71?
We came down here, and Puce called Pippi, and he was living in Mexico City, and we went in and had lunch with him, and I bought it at the luncheon table, and we lived there for almost 20 years.
And you were apparently remodeling it for about 20 years.
I was remodeling it for
You
20
never stopped
years. Yeah,
remodeling
right.
it?
Well, I had done that in Chicago. I used to buy buildings that were in demolition court and then, you know, put them back together.
You found a very interesting photo of the house. Can we?
Well, you know, it's in a sort of castellated style. Bullfighters love heraldry, and Pippi was no exception. And he said that there had been an old building here that was called the Castillo. And he built the first tower, and we added the second tower, you know, just to give it balance. But
And the lake was always.
and the lake was always there.
Yeah. You imported
And we imported the swans,
the swans.
and we did a lot of work on the gardens. I've really had more experience working on gardens than I have on houses, but I have done a lot of restoration. I did about 7 buildings in Chicago.
You got it? David, I think you found this photo.
Now, this is the way we found it, and there were a bunch of students who were sleeping on the floor in it. And I think it must have appeared in the Berkeley bar, because I remember about that time, when we were staying there, I went down the kitchen, there was a guy frying eggs, my eggs. And he just, you know, it's just a place to come and flop. And there were a lot of sort of hippie types who were hanging around at that time. But when we went in to see Pippi, Puce said, we walked in the door and Puce said, "Your sainted mother would be turning in her grave if she knew what those young people are doing out there, and they're not married." And then she said, "And besides, there are fleas." So the next time we went, I felt badly about the fact that all of the young people were gone, and so were the fleas.
Oh, the fleas were gone?
He had sprayed the place, and he cleaned it up.
I like the way this photo was taken with the old bridge.
Yeah, I don't know how he did that.
It's very nice.
Yeah.
David, what do you think are the most significant changes that have occurred in San Miguel since you first came?
Well, of course, the greater population. You know, San Miguel has been subject to urban sprawl and is spread all over into these colonias, but fortunately, the central part of San Miguel is virtually the same. The market used to be next to the parroquia, which was true of almost all Mexican towns, because the people were expected to go to Mass, and then on the way home from Mass they would stop at the market. The market is now the Terraza restaurant.
Yeah.
And then they moved it over, you know, in the 30s, I think, to the market that Pippi did the benefit for.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it, of course, there was a lot more association between Mexicans and foreigners because there were so few foreigners. You know, there were like maybe 20 or 25, and they were largely art students. And there were a few people were here, like Fleda McFarland and like Riva and Leonard Brooks, and Sterling was here. And then there were some artists from California. There were a few Canadians. There was a marvelous lady whose name was Martha Hausman, I think her name was. She was the darling of the Swedish stage, and she was the one who had gotten Ingrid Bergman started, you know, in the as an actress. And I remember when I first came here, you know, I was about 25 years old, and I was in, there were no telephones, and so people would send a servant over with a note, and she invited me to her house, and I thought my hostess would be invited, but she wasn't, and I went, and I was the only guest, and I had this lady, you know, who was in her 80s, and I thought, oh, this is going to be awful. It turned out to be the most interesting night of my life. She was really a fascinating woman.
You see, 80 doesn't mean necessarily that it would be boring.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. We know plenty.
Yeah, right.
90 and more.
Right.
Fascinating.
That's right.
David, how did you learn your good Spanish? I've always wondered. Because you speak it so well.
Well, I've studied with Josefina Vasquez, you know, for years.
Are you shooting? Lived out here in the Atotonilco area. What can you tell us about the people and the background and the history?
Well, you know, like most of these small towns in Mexico, I grew up around a hacienda, and the church was built by Father, what was it, Alfaro Niray, who was a very charismatic and a multi-talented man. He was a poet, and he was an educator. He was an architect. He was a painter. And he had done other churches, like 4 or 5, in other parts of Mexico. He's a man of independent means. And so this was to be his master work, and he was looking for the Sodom and Gomorrah of Mexico, and it was right here, you know. These people were, what do they say, they were dancing, using peyote, and in quote,
flagellating. Right?
And flagellating and engaging in unwholesome practices, I think that's what they said. So he built it, and he found an unlettered Indian whose name was Poco Sangre, who did those little retablos that are in the vestibule. But the church itself is really almost a storehouse of Mexican art. Most Mexican art is message art anyway, and it runs from these extremely primitive, little naive little paintings of Poco Sangre to very academic European type religious art. And the people in Atotonilco are very poor, but very nice and very industrious. And we've always enjoyed being out here with them.
And then, of course, there was Father Wall.
Father Wall. Father Wall was Father On. He was a Benedictine monk who had built at Abacu, New Mexico, a place called Christ in the Desert. And when his mother died, she left money to build a little chapel here in Mexico, and so he built this chapel, which was designed by Nagasaki, you know, the Japanese architect, furniture maker, and of course Father Wall had marvelous taste. And the people are still, it still operates, and the people are still doing carvings which were designed by Nagasaki. And you know, his approach to carving was that the wood tells you what it wants to be. And that he wouldn't impose ideas on it. And he was doing it in the most natural kind of way.
And he died how long ago, Father Wall?
Father Wall? Oh, I think maybe about 6 or 7 years ago.
But it's still continuing.
It's still continuing, yeah. And strangely enough, he had never been a member of the order that he had done so much for. And so just before he died, the abbot or whatever he is, but you know, the head of the order came down here and ordained him and put him into the order that he had founded. Now there are largely Mexican priests out there and monks.
And what we were wondering as we drove over here today about Cortijo. What is happening with Cortijo? Is it being sold or?
The hotel?
I don't think the hotel is being sold, but the property around there were a lot of for sale signs.
Well, a lot of people, you know, when the peso was being devalued, a lot of people felt that they should put their money into real estate. These are largely people who come from other towns, you know, like Irapuato or from Mexico City or from Querétaro, who built these houses which they have no need for. And, you know, it's been a sort of ghost town of modern buildings, and so now they're trying to sell them because they have more confidence and they can make money, you know, with their money.
Well, what about Las Grutas? Las Grutas.
Oh, Las Grutas? Well, that belongs to Adelo Perez, and he's, what do they say about him? Well, he doesn't really want to run it as a swimming pool. And of course, the water table has been going down, and previously he was he had a hot waterfall, and previously he had no expense, but now that he has to bring the water up electrically, it's very expensive, and you know, he just says it's not profitable enough to do.
You've always wanted to live in the country, right? I mean, have you ever had a desire to move into San Miguel, into town?
Yeah, I would like to live in San Miguel.
Yeah.
I had started this, you know, when my wife was alive, and they said she could live for another 20 years, but, you know, it didn't work out that way. But I think maybe I'm negotiating now to buy a little piece of property and build a house in San Miguel.
So you can have the best of both worlds.
And I can have both.
Yeah,
Close to the Central, but in Chicago we had lived in the shadow of, you know, the Chicago towers. So although I grew up in a suburb and, you know, with some acreage, but I like living in the city, and I like living in the country. But there's a lot of real estate activity out here now because, you know, people are, it's difficult to get around. And,
are there a lot of gringos building out here now?
Yes. Yeah.
There are.
Artists.
Yeah.
I did an article one time called Follow the Artists. And, you know, artists have opened up all of the most interesting places in the world. Even Nice or Cannes or San Paul de Vence or all those places. There he is.
David, I'm so impressed with the way you're doing this interview, because not only are you full of fabulous information and stories and exciting things, but you seem so relaxed and at ease and comfortable doing it. Have you done it all your life?
No, never. And it was really, in my business, no, it was really a great handicap to me. I remember one time I had a call from Kent State College, you know, where it was just about the time that they shot and killed, you know, the 5 students there. Yeah. And they wanted me to come down and do something, you know, on a symposium. And I told them I never did that. And then she said, she asked me all of these really silly questions. And the last question was, what do I consider the best form of communication? And I said, making love, and hung up.
I love it.
Oh, good.